All right, they're starting to come in. We're up to 20, 25. So this is the prequel, everybody. I'm going to just chat a little bit until everybody's in. I'm Dr. Ted Barnett, and you can see there's Dr. Milton Mills. This is not the official introduction, everybody. I want you to know that there will be an official introduction, but we got to get everybody on board first. Everyone on this first-class ocean liner. So anyway, looks like we're up to about 90 people here. Perfect.
Did you say 90?
We're up to 90. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, we're good. So welcome everybody. I am Dr. Ted Barnett, the high-tech doctor with low-tech solutions, sometimes known as Dr. Veggie. The smiling guy the other guy smiling guy on your screen is Dr. Milton Mills, who I will be introducing shortly. He is the star of our show, and somebody's already said, hi, Dr. Barnett from Nivi Jaswal. Okay, to all panelists. All right. So this webinar tonight is co-sponsored. It's the Rochester Area Vegan Society. I almost said vegetarian. We were the Rochester Area Vegetarian Society for many years, but about 5 years ago we made the transition. And it's also co-sponsored with Rochester Lifestyle Medicine Institute. And you can see I'm wearing a Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine for Food Groups button there. So we're big fans of PCRM. And before I tell you about our guest tonight, I'll just tell you a little bit about the Rochester Lifestyle Medicine Institute, which runs a number of educational programs, which we're very excited about, including our 15-day whole food plant-based jumpstart, which is now, because of COVID, we're not doing it in our office anymore, but now we're reaching people all over the world. So we've had people from about 35 states, from 3 countries, including the UK and Canada and Vietnam. And so lots of exciting things in the plant-based world. And as part of the, in the Rochester Lifestyle Medicine Institute, we refer to vegan as the V word. But Rochester Area Vegan Society, we can use the vegan word. So we're both here tonight. And our speaker tonight will be talking about the parallels between the vegan movement and civil rights. And so for those of you who don't know, Dr. Milton Mills is a critical care ICU physician who practices in the Washington, D.C. area. He's on the board of directors of Plant-Based Prevention of Disease, or PPOD, which is a great annual conference organized by our good friend, Dr. Bob Leroy. He's not a doctor, RD, Bob Leroy, RD. Dr. Mills is also, has served as the Associate Director of Preventive Medicine for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and has worked with this Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine to address social inequities and dietary recommendations. He's also been a major contributor to position papers presented by PCRM, again, the little button, to the United States Department of Agriculture regarding dietary guidelines for Americans, and was the lead plaintiff in PCRM's class action lawsuit that asks for warning labels on milk, which he'll talk about on his own here. Dr. Mills earned his medical degree at Stanford University School of Medicine, so he's no dummy. I couldn't have gotten into Stanford, but I did go to medical school.
I was gonna say, that's not true. All right.
That's true. I did. I actually trained on the other coast in Boston. And anyway, he completed his internal medicine residency at Georgetown University Hospital. He's published several research journal articles dealing with racial bias in federal nutrition policy, and he frequently donates his time by practicing at free medical clinics and travels widely, speaking at hospitals, churches, and community centers throughout the country. He was featured in the recent film, What the Health, and also in The Invisible Vegan. Dr. Mills speaks on a wide variety of topics, including the microbiome, the connection between diet and cancer, human anatomy, and plant-based diet, and what the Bible has to say about diet and the impact of racism on the health of communities of color. And before I finish reading my prepared statement, I just want to tell you we now have 110 participants. We have several people from Australia, Montreal, Quebec, Dublin, Ireland, and other foreign countries, including Texas. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's another. Manitoba. And I think those are the foreign countries, but there's about 20 different states represented here. So I'm very excited about that. And we're just thrilled and honored to have Dr. Mills speak on the topic of parallels between the vegan movement and the civil rights movement. So take it away, Milton.
All right. Well, Ted, I just want to thank you and the Rochester Vegan Society for inviting me back. I also want to thank you guys for wanting to make sure we had a presentation this month that kind of incorporated the theme of the month, which is Black History Month. So before I get started, I just want to tell people a little bit of the provenance of this talk, why I developed it, and the issues it's designed to address. We, up until last year, there was an annual conference every July at the University of Pittsburgh, Johnstown, put on by the North American, now Vegan Society, called, we'll just say Vegan Summerfest, and because it's always been a vegan event. And 1 year, in talking with some of the participants at the conference, I kept hearing people say that I don't think I'm going to go home for the holidays because I can't take watching my family members eat animals. Or conversely, you know, my family always gives me a lot of grief about my dietary choices. And there was this kind of thought that, you know what, I'm just going to hang out with some of my vegan buddies, have ourselves a nice vegan Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever, and be done with all of those hard-headed, knucklehead people. And I understand that. I absolutely understand the impulse to want to be around people who understand what you're doing, why you do what you do, and who give you support and affirmation for those choices. But we also have a responsibility to those around us. And that responsibility means that we have to do things that may be uncomfortable for us because it is better for the greater good. And I thought about the civil rights movement, and I thought I had recently gone to see the Martin Luther King a memorial after it opened, and that experience, which I will talk about in this lecture, was much more emotionally impactful than I had anticipated. And I thought about all of the people in the civil rights movement who stepped out of their comfort zone to make this country a better place, not just for Black people, but for everybody. And we have a similar job to do as vegans. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to hit share. I'm going to hit application.
And while Dr. Mills is setting that up, I just want to tell people that we have a Q&A window. So please put your questions in there. You can use the chat, but I won't be taking questions from there unless we. I can't promise I'll be taking questions from there. So please put your questions into the Q&A if you can.
Okay.
And,
all right. Yeah. We ready?
Milton? Yeah, we're ready. Go for it.
Okay. All right.
I'm just killing time here.
Oh, okay. All right. So you can see my screen, correct? Well, the first point I want to make is that it is really important for us all to understand that Black history is really American history. And it is as important to, you know, white Americans and Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans as it is for Black Americans, because when you look at the country that exists today, much of what we consider to be really important in terms of our civil rights and social mobility grew out of legislation that dealt with the history of Black people in the United States, starting with the civil rights, the 14th, 15th, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and then on through the Voting and Civil Rights Acts, which clearly helped inspire a number of other marginalized groups such as LGBTQ, other ethnic Americans and women to get out and also march and work towards getting the rights that we all deserve as Americans. So just
Milton, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. Can you turn
Sure.
your camera back on, please?
Okay. It always, I apologize. It does that.
That's all right.
Okay.
People would much rather see you than me.
All right.
You're much
Okay.
better looking. There you go. Okay.
All right. So we're good, right?
Yep. Let's try it again.
Okay. So
Perfect. We see. Okay.
there you go. All right. So again, I want everybody that is participating in this event to embrace Black history as their history too. And we're going to take some lessons from that tonight. So the title of our lecture is Having the Courage of Our Convictions. And this will look at lessons for the vegan movement drawn from the Bible and the struggle for civil rights. And I always start my lectures off with a quote from the Bible. This is from the book of John. It says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." So as I mentioned before, when I went to the Martin Luther King Memorial after it had opened, I stood there staring up at this statue, and I found myself moved to tears. And the reason was that I realized that the things that I have been able to do in my life in terms of reaching, utilizing my intellect, trying to reach my potential as a person, were made possible because of the work, the effort that Dr. King and others in the civil rights movement put in to change this country. Because Ted mentioned that I went to Stanford Medical School. Stanford University was founded in 1891, if I'm not mistaken, but they did not accept their first Black medical student until 1969. And, it wasn't that Black people suddenly became smart in 1969, but it was, again, the direct outgrowth of the effort and work and struggles of people to make this society a better place, a fairer place, and to open its institutions and opportunities to people who had formerly been excluded. And I want you to you can see in the background, there's kind of a mountain, and then there is the statue with Dr. King. And what is written on the side of his statue says, "Out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope." And again, when Dr. King started his work in the 1950s and early 60s, this nation had had nearly 100 years of official discrimination codified into its laws. And what wasn't actually made a law, it was by custom. Black people and other people of color were excluded from participating in many of the benefits of American society. There were places we couldn't go, things we couldn't do. And because we had an unofficial form of apartheid. But in the 50s, Black Americans began to organize and systematically attack this edifice of oppression and discrimination to tear it down piece by piece. And they had no guarantee of success. but they believed in what they were doing. And again, those of us who have enlarged our mindset, enlarged our viewpoint of the world to embrace the tenets of veganism, we know that what we're doing is the right thing to do. We know that number one, it's better for our health. It's better for the earth. And very importantly, it markedly reduces and or eliminates the cruelty and abuse that human beings often visit on the other beings that we share this planet with. But when we look out over the landscape of the United States and by extension the world, you know, everybody's eating meat, or certainly a lot of people are. And sometimes it can seem like, wow, is this ever going to change? Are we ever going to get to a place where we don't celebrate cruelty and delight in taking the lives of other sentient beings? And the answer is we have to believe that yes, we will. And that is what we have to work for. And even if we can't see it in the way that we want it to ultimately exist, we have to be willing to continue to work towards that goal. Just like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and all of the other civil rights heroes, they were, much of this took place in the South, which was an incredibly violent, virulently racist society with longstanding traditions where they could lynch Black people at the drop of a hat and get away with it, and they knew it. And some of the people that I'm going to show you next were killed in pursuit of this better world that they wanted to create. But again, they didn't let that stop them. And we can't let opposition stop us from pursuing and standing up for what we know to be true. So in addition to Dr. King, here are some other important icons from the civil rights. This, of course, is Rosa Parks. This is Myrlie Evers. Her husband, Medgar Evers, was killed. This is Cheney, Schwerner, and Johnson. That was Fannie Lou Hamer. That's Dr. King. This is John Lewis, and that is Jim Zwerg. These are children from the Birmingham Children's March who were hit with the water hoses and the dogs, but because they did what they did, we now live in a markedly different world. And of course, it is not the world that we want completely, but it is a world that is so much better than it used to be. And it is better than it used to be because people had the courage to stand up for what they knew was right, despite whatever opposition they encountered. And so I want to share with you this poem by Maya Angelou called Still I Rise. It says, you may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Do you take it awful hard? 'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air I rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from the past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I am a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling up with the rising tide. I think that's what it says. And the last stanza, out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from the past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I am a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise.
Milton, that's beautiful. I'm going to interrupt you for just 1 second.
Sure.
A few people have commented that they can see me, and I just want everyone to know that Milton doesn't get to see you guys out in the audience, and so I'm the one live face. If you don't want to see me, go up to the upper right-hand corner and click on View, and just click on Speaker View, and the only person you see is the one who's actually speaking, and that'll be Milton. But Milton will still get to communicate with me. So I apologize if you can't. I apologize if you don't like looking at me.
So what I've depicted here are some vegan options that you can now buy at your local grocery store. And the reason I put this here is because I became plant-based as a teenager in the late 70s. And back in the 70s, there was no such thing as vegan or vegetarian entrees options in a supermarket. When we wanted to get quote unquote health food or plant-based foods, we had to make a pilgrimage to the one health food store that existed in Oakland at that time and actually buy raw ingredients for the most part and make our own plant-based options. Well, the world has changed phenomenally since then. We all know there's Whole Foods, there's Mom's Market, there are thousands of different quote health food stores selling all sorts of plant-based options, and there's copious amounts of educational materials. There are all sorts of organizations that are dedicated to helping to make this a more vegan-friendly world, and a world that is safe for not just humans but for other animals. And I wanted to make this point because, again, when we look out over the landscape of America, we see Burger King, we see Wendy's, we see Popeyes, we see KFC. We see a lot that isn't right. We see a lot that we still want to change. But, this is that glass half full, half empty, that we have to remind ourselves that the world has changed in amazing ways, in ways that I never thought I would see in my life. And no, it's not the way I want it to be, but we're getting there. And we simply have to be patient and persistent in our pursuit of the things that we know are important. I can't tell you why change in this world takes much more time than any of us would want. I just know that it does, but I also know that we can't get tired. We can't become discouraged. We're soldiers, and we just have to keep going. So let's look at some of the ways that we would still like to see things changed. And here you have George Bush doing the ridiculous and absurd pardoning of the turkeys that occurs every Thanksgiving. The president pardons a turkey when we know the reality of Thanksgiving is massive slaughter of these animals. So what's interesting is, how did this tradition begin? Well, it actually turns out that the first couple that received a turkey were the Coolidges. First Lady Grace Coolidge accepted the first donated turkey from a Vermont Girl Scout back in 1925. Harry Truman was the first president to receive a turkey from the Poultry and Egg Board, which subsequent to him, all of the turkeys that have been donated and then pardoned at the White House come from the Poultry and Egg Board. And it was George, but even though he did pardon one, I guess, here and there, it still wasn't an official right until George W. Bush made the pardoning ceremony an official rite of passage for every president. But again, still the reality is that 46 million turkeys are slaughtered every year for Thanksgiving alone. That's just staggering when you think about it. And what's really horrific is that these birds are only 5 to 6 months old when they're killed. So they are literally still infants and toddlers in terms of their total lifespan, because turkeys can actually live to be more than 12 years old. So that means that we are literally slaughtering these animals when they are babies. And the reason they are so big is because they've been bred and frequently injected with these growth stimulants to make them grow at an accelerated rate, which also correlates with why they can promote a variety of diseases. But when you realize that we are literally killing and eating babies, I have coined a term that I call pedophagia. Pedo meaning child, phagia meaning eating. We're eating the children, and it's just horrible. Well, we know that again, there is tradition, and Ted, I need to do something real quick. Hold on. I need to get rid of this. No, I'm okay. All right.
There's lots of good questions coming in, so I just.
Oh, awesome! Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Somebody asked. One of the questions was which of the George Bushes are we talking about?
W, not W. W was the one that made it the official. All right. So we know that our society is riven with tradition and addiction, and people look at eating animals as something that they can't live without, or that, well, it's Thanksgiving, you have to have turkey. Well, no, you don't. We don't have to show this blind adherence to what are dysfunctional, archaic, and unhealthy learned dietary habits. As I try to remind all of my people who attend my lectures, nobody asked for fried chicken, ice cream, or pork chop in the delivery room. As babies, we were all born without preferences. The things that we have been taught to eat and that we think are such a part of us are really nothing but learned dietary habits. And we can become addicted to those dietary habits, just like somebody can become addicted to drugs or alcohol. But it is still just that, a learned habit and an addiction, and it is unhealthy for us. It is destructive to our environment, and of course, it is cruel beyond belief to the animals whose lives are being sacrificed. And the point is that we don't have to be slaves to the traditions that we were brought up in. We can step outside of those traditions and develop new ones that are better for us, better for our families, better for the world, and better for the animals. And I sometimes ask people in a not somewhat facetious way that if a alien civilization came to this planet and landed in Times Square, several things would be immediately obvious. Number one, they are way more intelligent than we are. Number two, they have technology that we can't even understand, let alone dream of. And my question would be, since they are so far advanced over us as Earthlings, would that give them the right to start eating us? And because that is the excuse that most people use when they talk about eating animals. Well, you know, man is this or humans are this. Well, does that give you the right to be cruel and abusive? And the answer, of course, is no. Because certainly if this alien civilization showed up, the fact that they were intelligent, more intelligent than we were, the fact that they had better technology than we had, still, I know everyone would feel that doesn't give you the right to kill me and take my life and eat me. And much the same is true of the animals we mistreat. And the other thing that people need to understand, but that a lot of people don't want to talk about, is the fact that our dietary habits of consuming other animals is built upon this brutal, cruel, and torturous practice of factory farming. Because the only way you can literally produce the amounts of animal tissue and animal secretions that human beings have become used to eating in Western countries is to take farming animals to an industrial scale. And that means these animals are confined in these brutal, cruel, cramped, torturous conditions. Because they are so overcrowded and stressed, they tend to become neurotic and to fight each other. So they will burn the beaks of the chickens off, or burn half of it off so that they can't peck each other to death. They will cut off the tails of pigs so that they don't chew each other's tails off. They perform castrations on these animals without any kind of anesthesia whatsoever. Because they are kept in these unsanitary, overcrowded conditions, they are constantly doused with pesticides and insecticides, and then they're fed antibiotics to try and keep them from succumbing to communicable diseases. And if you look up at the banner at the top, it says GET usage. What is GET? GET stands for Growth Enhancing Technology. And I did a lecture for my good friend Jason Hannon from Canada and his group on the differences between grass-fed beef and conventionally raised animals. And obviously we can't go into that tonight, but let me just say that you know, grass-fed beef is an illusion. And it is, it doesn't work. It is not sustainable. It is not scalable. And the world doesn't have enough grass to feed the numbers of animals we Western societies consume each year. But in conventionally raised beef, which is the stuff that you find in the supermarkets and restaurants, they use what's called GET, Growth Enhancing Technology. Because again, you have to think about it. In order for these guys to make a profit, they have to make these animals grow as fast as they can so they can get to market weight with a minimal input of resources so that their profit margin is improved. So these animals are routinely given natural steroid hormones, but also artificial steroid hormones, as well as other growth stimulants that are injected in their bodies and so forth. And some of these drugs and chemicals that are used to make these animals grow at an accelerated rate and put on all of this body tissue will leave them so sick and weak that creates a lot of the phenomenon of downer cows, that these animals can't even walk because they're so essentially messed up and strung out on all these drugs. But just please understand that when your family members go out and buy beef, pork, whatever from the supermarket, they are getting all of these hormones and other growth stimulants that were fed to these animals, they will be ingesting them as well. And then one last little point, when it comes to raising beef, again, a cow's normal lifespan is probably around 25 years of age, whereas the animals that are sent to market and slaughtered for human consumption are generally about 2.5 to 3 years old. So again, this is that pedophagia I mentioned. We are eating babies, and it's disgusting, really. All right. According to the Humane Society of the United States, more than 10 billion animals of all kinds, including cattle, chickens, ducks, hogs, sheep, lamb, and turkeys are killed for food in the United States. Just in the United States every year since 2015. That is more animals than there are people on this globe. And it's just, it's just heinous what we are doing to the other creatures that share this planet with us. Well, the end result of the Western style diet is chronic diseases, accelerated aging, increased risk of developing dementia, and a premature death. Major killers, as we all know, in Western countries, including the United States, are heart disease, cancers, stroke, hypertension, diabetes, and all of these diseases are directly related to consuming an animal food-based diet, which promotes all of these problems, including dementias. And experts estimate more than 80% of the chronic disease and premature death we see annually in this country could be prevented by changes in our diets and lifestyle. And I know that everybody listening to this lecture knows someone in their family or a good friend who died well before their time from something like a heart attack or cancer. And it's just tragic and heartbreaking to think that those people might still be with us if they had had the information and the support to change their diet and lifestyle. The United States spends more per capita than any other nation in the world on healthcare, including $1.5 trillion that are and medical costs that are associated not with all disease, just the preventable ones. Ladies and gentlemen, we are literally struggling with deficits and asking questions of how we're going to get money to invest in infrastructure or invest in schools. And we are throwing away $1.5 trillion every year in medical costs on diseases that could have been prevented in the first place. That is just staggering, absolutely staggering.
And now with COVID, those are predisposing to bad outcomes.
Absolutely. And then, of course, if you made a change in your diet, you know that you often experience, and this usually comes as somewhat a surprise, a lot of anger, a lot of opprobrium, disparaging comments, and misapprehension about how healthy your diet is going to be, because we all get this age-old question: where are you going to get your protein? Well, pretty much from the same place the animal that y'all are eating got it, but we won't discuss that. And, you know, again, you have to be prepared for this. And it helps to educate yourself so that you can, when people ask you these inevitable questions, you can answer them in a you know, calm and coherent way. And I generally do, when people start asking me about why I made my dietary choices, I will initially, you know, talk to them and try to explain things in a very intelligent fashion. But then if they start trying to troll me and they ask me where I get my protein, I tell them that space aliens deliver it to my house every night at 12 o'clock. Because, you know, at some point you just have to say, I've had enough of this foolishness. But I like what Willy Wonka here says. Please explain to me why hospitals are filled with people who have heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and cancer, and are not filled with the so-called protein deficient vegans. I don't understand that. Well, now I want to touch on the intersectionality portion of this talk. and talk about racism, the abuse of animals, and white male patriarchy. And you notice that I put white in parentheses because white male patriarchy is a problem in the United States and other European countries. But male patriarchy in general is a problem in almost every culture, depending on how sort of philosophically awake they are. And within the United States, the myth of racial inferiority was created by, again, the white male political leaders who wrote the Constitution and founded this nation to justify, not explain, but justify their unequal treatment of people of color. Belief in racial inferiority is not what triggered unequal treatment. It was the unequal treatment that triggered and caused the theory to be developed. That's taken from a book called White Fragility. And Ta-Nehisi Coates says that race is the child of racism, not the father of it. Racism and speciesism are on the continuum of otherization and are manifestations of, in this instance, white male patriarchy, but generally a history of male patriarchy. I want to direct your attention to the picture in the lower right hand section of this. And I recently found out, I'd seen this picture probably most of my adult life, but I recently found out why that picture was taken. That gentleman was an escaped slave who went to join the Union Army. And the army group that he went to join was headed by General Benjamin Butler. And when General Butler saw the horrific scars on this man's back, and the other slaves who were showing up with, again, just signs of grotesque abuse, he instructed his official photographers to sit these people down and document what they were seeing, because he wanted people to understand why slavery had to end, and that, you know, contrary to a lot of the lies that were being told about it being a benign institution, it was an institution of unbelievable cruelty and abusiveness. And it reminds me of what General Eisenhower did towards the end of World War II as they were liberating the German death camps. And he insisted that his photographers document what they were seeing, because he knew that without that documentation, people would try to dismiss the Holocaust as not being real, being over-exaggerated, and dispute the truthfulness of it. But when you have the pictures, that's pretty hard to argue with. The question is, why do we humans dehumanize and animalize others? Well, the reason is because it's much easier to abuse and kill other people and other beings when we deny their essential sameness to us and their sentience. And we do much the same thing to animals that some people still choose to eat. But science has shown us that animals, in fact, are sentient. They have feelings and emotions. They also experience grief and loss. These facts make the continued wanton slaughter and abuse of animals absolutely indefensible, in my opinion. Alex Hershav, who himself was a Holocaust survivor, has made connections between the cruelties and abusiveness of factory farming and animal agribusiness and his experiences as a Holocaust survivor and what he went through in the Holocaust. And I will just say parenthetically that I appreciate Alex for drawing those comparisons, and I will refer to his statements as I'm doing now, but that is not something that I would attempt to an analogy I would attempt to make on my own, because I think that only Jewish people have the right to make those comparisons. Likewise, when it comes, I think that there are very real parallels between slavery and what we do to animals, but it is always best that those kinds of connections be made by a Black person, so that it doesn't come across as being insensitive and condescending. But another little known fact is that when the Nazis sat down to come up with their Nuremberg laws governing how they were going to mistreat and deny rights to Jewish people, they used American Jim Crow race laws as their blueprint. And Hitler apparently had a lot of regard for the Jim Crow laws of the South. And, you know, as vegans, we are right to appeal to human impulses for justice, mercy, and compassion on behalf of vulnerable animals. But we have to understand we cannot ask people to care about animals being ripped from their parents or cruelly and unjustly confined to cages, and then turn around and close our eyes when the same things are happening to human children and adults. We cannot demand that people care about animals being unjustly killed and then turn our backs when it happens to Black and brown people. We also cannot continue to pretend that we don't see or understand the unequal and unfair treatment of people of color in America that circumscribes and imperils their lives. At the bottom, you see a picture from the Capitol insurrection that happened on January 6th. And the reason I included that picture was because as I sat there in real time watching these pictures come across my TV screen and listening to the news anchors and pundits talking about this, the thing that they said in an almost casual and cavalier fashion was, wow, if those had been Black people, they would have been shot and killed. And it just took my breath away to realize that people have seemingly always understood the unfairness of the way Black people and other people of color are treated, and that we don't get the same kind of consideration and protection that white Americans get, and they kind of accepted it as a casual fact. And I'm telling you that the knife was already there, but that was a twist of that knife, because how can we call ourselves a decent society or consider ourselves to be decent people when we know things like this exist and we don't do anything to rectify it? It is antithetical to and a betrayal of the principles and tenets of veganism to refuse to care about and act on behalf of vulnerable humans who are abused and oppressed and who also suffer mistreatment, as many of the animals we allege that we care about. Anyone claiming to be vegan who maintains or believes that animal lives matter, but Black lives don't, is in reality just showing another form of racism. And the picture at the top says, living vegan means respecting everyone's right not to be owned, used, abused, or killed, regardless of your species. And at the bottom is Audre Lorde, who was a queer feminist poet, civil rights activist, and scholar from the late 60s and 70s. And she said, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live single issue lives. And we have got to learn to see the connections between the abuse visited on animals and the abuse visited on human beings. We all must understand that vegans will never achieve real and lasting animal liberation until we create justice, fairness, and equity for all beings, including oppressed and abused human beings. We are kidding ourselves if we think we can focus only on what happens to, quote, animals and ignore the plight of people who are being victimized by hate, racism, and bigotry. Ignoring the abuse of any living being only validates the concept of otherization, and it ultimately works against our desired goals. So let's talk about our calling. And this is a painting of one of the most profound, important, and evocative events in the Bible. And this is Queen Esther denouncing Haman. This is a source of the Jewish holiday of Purim. And so let me explain what this is all about and why this is so important for us. This dates from the time of the Persian Empire, when the Persians succeeded the Babylonians and were in control of Palestine, the Middle East, and had taken the Jewish captives who were formerly being held by Babylon into Persia. Well, the Persian emperor saw and fell in love with a Jewish woman by the name of Esther and made her his queen. And there came a point where one of the kind of chief prime ministers of the Persian realm, Haman, developed this hatred of Jews. And so without the king's knowledge, he passed a law that on a specific date in the future, people throughout the Persian Empire would be allowed to kill Jews and there would be no penalties. So his whole point was to destroy the Jewish nation. And according to this law he passed, the Jews were not allowed to fight back. And if they did, they could suffer the death penalty. So Esther's uncle, Mordecai, called her in and told her what was going on and said, you have to do something. Now, the problem is that in the Persian court, you could not appear before the emperor without being summoned. To come into the emperor's presence without being summoned was, again, an automatic death sentence. And Esther, in talking with her uncle, said, what can I do? I haven't been summoned by the king. And Mordecai said to her, who knows whether you are come into the kingdom or the world for just such a time as this? In other words, maybe this is exactly why God allowed you to be here to this day, so that you could advocate for our people. And Esther, after thinking about it, uttered one of the really most evocative lines in the Bible. She said, though it be not according to the law, I go. And she went in before the king and told him what was going on. And the king then put out passed a law that said that the Jewish nation could arm themselves and fight off anyone who came to try and kill them. And later on, Haman ended up being hung on a gallows that he had erected for Mordecai. So the point of this is that where we find ourselves in life is not by accident. We are put here for a reason. And that reason is that we are to bear witness. We have all been appointed to be what I call ambassadors of truth. We have a job to do for ourselves, for the world, for the animals. And the Mount of Transfiguration refers to a scene from the New Testament where Jesus took 3 of his disciples with him up to the top of a mountain, and he was transfigured before them into his heavenly presence where he looked like God. And Moses and Abraham came down to talk with him. And it was such a spectacular, awe-inspiring event that after his visit with those 2 saints were over, Peter, John, and James said, Lord, let us stay here. Let's build, tabernacles here and dwell here forever, because obviously this place is amazing and it's holy. And Jesus told them no, because we have work to do. You've got to take what you've just seen and go out and tell other people about it. And that is also true of the knowledge that we have about the importance of being plant-based. you know, yes, it is good from time to time to come together with like-minded people and to enjoy the fellowship of people who understand why we're doing what we're doing. But we must always keep in mind that we still have a job to do, and we can't separate ourselves from the rest of humanity. We've got to get down with the people in order to educate them. The world needs us. It may not want us, but it does need us. And while we should be fearless in advocating for the things we know to be right, we also have to remind ourselves to be patient, kind, and understanding. We should always try to be respectful of the fact that other people are on their own personal journey. And while they may not be where we want them to be at a specific time, that's really not our call to make. Our job is simply to share the truth that we know with others and hope that it will do its work on their heart to change them. And I remind vegans all the time that none of us sprang into the world as a fully formed vegan like Athena sprang from the head of Zeus. If you don't know Greek mythology, it said that Zeus had a headache one day, and it was a splitting headache, and he went and passed out, and Athena sprang from his forehead, fully grown, dressed in armor, a fully realized individual. Well, that is not how most of us came to veganism. We came to this in a stepwise fashion. Our minds were enlightened by people sharing truth with us. And just as we had our own journey to this truth, we've got to be respectful of the fact that other people have to make a similar journey themselves. And this brings up one of my favorite quotes. It's by Clarissa Parker Estes. She says, "Wherever you don't fit in, that is where you belong." You know, there's not much effort required to be in the company of like-minded people. The effort comes, the real work comes when you are somewhere where people don't understand who you are or why you're doing what you do. But that is how we spread light in the world. And it brings up this story of the unreasonable person. And you may or may not have heard the story that a reasonable person looks at the world and says, how am I going to change myself so that I can conform more closely to the world and not experience a lot of trouble? The unreasonable person looks at the world and says, how can I change the world so that it is more in tune with me? And what that means is that all true progress, therefore, depends on unreasonable people. And like Pigpen says, be you, the world will adjust. So we should all strive to be those unreasonable people and to get into what John Lewis referred to as good trouble. Now, having said that, I just want to make a PSA to say that although I use his likeness, I am not endorsing Pigpen's habit of not bathing. All right, let me move on. It is tempting, of course, to retreat to the comfort and safety of familiar company and camaraderie, and the camaraderie of like-minded people. But that is not why we are here. We are here to bear witness to both the ugliness of animal abuse and eating animals, but also to the beauty that is to be found in changing one's diet and lifestyle so that you are in harmony with the world and you are creating goodness and compassion as opposed to brutality and destruction. We are here to enlighten and change the world, and that can never be accomplished by retreating from the world. We must confront and engage it. And it's important to do this because this is not only our planet, it also belongs to the other creatures or other beings with whom we share this planet. And there is definitely reason for hope. Veganism is nearly twice as popular as it was 5 years ago. Searches for vegan topics on Google have increased by almost 50% in last year alone. And maybe it was just because people were stuck at home with their computers from COVID, but I'd like to think it's because people are really starting to realize the value and worth of a plant-based lifestyle. In his book, The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell defines a tipping point as the moment of critical mass, the threshold, the boiling point. In other words, this is the point at which things start to change on a society-wide basis. He suggests that social change occurs as a kind of an epidemic and argues that ideas themselves have what he refers to as infectivity, that if they are compelling enough, they become their own memes, they're shared, other people start to adopt them, and you can really get movement in society. And we've seen this happen time and time again in our society, and that's what happened to a large degree with the civil rights movements of the mid-20th century, that by bringing these issues to the consciousness of the nation, people were moved and felt compelled to want to see things change. And he argues that in order for sweeping change to occur, you need three things. The law of the few. And this is important because a lot of times people want to wait until everybody, or at least most of the people around them, are doing what they think should be done or what they want to see them do. And that's not how change ever occurs in life. And we all know this because we know that most of the people we work with are sitting around drinking coffee and doing Google searches on foolishness. And it's only a few of the people who are actually getting the work done. And so he argues that 80% of the work will always be done by 20% of the people. Then there's the stickiness factor. And that is that the content of the message renders its impact memorable. And, you know, there's this old expression, nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And I believe that truth itself has stickiness. It is compelling because it resonates in our souls in ways that we really don't understand. And then there's the power of context. He writes, epidemics are sensitive to the conditions and circumstances of the times and places they occur. And again, that means that when society is ready for these things, that's when things start to happen and starts to change. And I think we are there because as the first slide or picture I showed you on this slide points out, the interest in veganism and plant-based lifestyles is growing by leaps and bounds. But the way you can really tell that we are reaching that tipping point, look at this. It's called Dove's Men Plus Care. And look at the area in red. They are actually advertising this, not to women, but to men, as being desirable because it's made with plant-based moisturizers. And this is not the only product that is now being advertised because it is vegan in the way that it is made. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I suggest to you is a true sea change in the way the world and our country is working. So things are definitely improving. And here are some quotes from Dr. King. These are inscriptions along the wall of his memorial, and they give us words to aspire to and live by. He says, we shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. In other words, truth has power. It has that stickiness, and it is compelling. And even though it doesn't necessarily follow the timeline that we would choose, it still will ultimately achieve its purpose. And so you have to remind yourself all the time that we are not alone in this fight. We have truth on our side. God is the author and repository and the champion of truth. This really is his fight, and we human beings are merely agents working together with him. Another quote says, the ultimate measure of a man or a woman is not where he or she stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where these people stand at times of challenge and controversy. It is very easy to take a stand when nobody's opposing you or when there's no danger associated with it. But that really doesn't tell us about our character. Character is shown when we are willing to stand for the right, even though it may be perceived as unpopular or as not the right thing to do. So in other words, when you are at your family get together and Uncle Bob starts to make the racist jokes, that's the point at which it's going to be uncomfortable, and it may kind of be awkward, but you need to say, that's not cool and that's not good, and that's racist and you really shouldn't do it, and I wish you wouldn't do it in my presence. When you go to work as a proud vegan. And when people ask you, why are you eating that? You can tell them all of the reasons that you have chosen that lifestyle, such as the lack of animal cruelty, the benefits for humans and the planet. And yes, you're going to run into trolls because everybody that I work with knows that I'm plant-based, and nevertheless, every now and then I'll get somebody who tries to troll me, who'll come in with, some chicken or something, and they'll sit down and say, oh, is it gonna bother you if I eat that? And I tell them no, because I'm not the one who's gonna get cancer. I'm not suggesting you be as flippant and glib as I can be, but I'm just saying that it is important to stand up for what we believe, even when it's uncomfortable. And this is one of the really most beautiful and important statements he ever made. He said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And again, that is true of animal abuse, but it is also true of racism, bigotry, and hate. And importantly, we have truth on our side, and that's something that we can take confidence in. And particularly when you look at the health benefits of vegan and plant-based diets. Over 100 years of medical and science research show that plant-based diets are without question the healthiest diets that humans can consume as adults. And I'm making the distinction of adults because babies, don't try and make your baby vegan. That's what breast milk is for. Babies, a small child's digestive system is not large enough to handle and extract enough calories from a bulky, fibrous, plant-based diet. Not until they are, I would say 2.5, 3 years of age or older. Can they move to an entirely plant-based diet? And in the unfortunate 1 or 2 cases that we've heard from time to time of people starving their children, and they always say, oh, these vegan parents were arrested for child abuse because they starved a child to the point where it was at death's door. It turns out that these were unfortunately people who were trying to make an infant plant-based, and you can't do that. That's why God gave mammals milk. And this is a Dilbert cartoon. He says, Dogbert, I don't understand why you or anybody would become a vegetarian. Dogbert says, you mean why don't I take dead animals, cook them until they become carcinogenic, then eat them instead of something nutritious? Is that your question? He said, exactly. Is there any good reason? Have you joined a cult? He said, well, I live in Loma Linda. And you almost certainly know that what's special about Loma Linda is that that's where a large group of Seventh-day Adventists live. And studies have shown that plant-based Adventist men in California live almost 10 years longer than non-Adventist men on average. Okay, and that means that some people do much, much better. The women live over 6.5 years longer than non-plant-based Adventist women. And I just want to point out that that does not mean being plant-based is less beneficial for women than it is for men. It is simply that, ladies, you guys already outlive us by such a big margin that there's just less room for improvement. Adventist vegetarians had lower risk of colon, breast, prostate, stomach, and kidney cancers, lower risk of diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, the metabolic syndrome, and elevated cholesterol levels, and a lower risk of all-cause mortality, which I always find it interesting when they point that out. All-cause mortality. That means a lower risk of suicide, a lower risk of getting drunk and driving into a brick wall. So they had a lower risk of dying from any cause. And I guess the studies are correct that being plant-based makes you a lot more intelligent. The latest installment of the Adventist Health Study, which is a huge multi-year study that has been done on Seventh-day Adventists living in the United States, has shown that plant-based Seventh-day Adventists have lower incidence rates for breast, colorectal, rectal, and lung cancer by 30, 16, 50%, and 30% respectively. Health benefits were most pronounced, again, in those Adventists who were plant-based. Black Seventh-day Adventists on plant-based diets were shown to be at significantly lower risk for type 2 diabetes, which is at epidemic proportions in the African-American community, and had reduced death rates and incidence of all cancers combined. They were significantly lower amongst the plant-based Black Adventists. In fact, the latest installment of that study said that Black plant-based Seventh-day Adventists are the healthiest Black people in the United States. This is based on U.S. Census population and the percent reduction in diabetes and cancers were by 36 and 22%. And finally, Blue Zone research shows that it was plant-based Seventh-day Adventists living in Loma Linda who are the longest lived population on Earth. And just to recap, the Blue Zone data research was done when researchers decided to look at the longest lived populations around the world. So you're looking at different places, different ethnic groups, different genetic background, and to find out what these populations had in common. And what they discovered was that the longest lived groups of humans on Earth are all largely or entirely plant-based. And that in fact, there was a dose response relationship, that the more plant-based the population was, the longer they lived and the fewer chronic diseases they had. And of the various groups they looked at around the world, the absolute longest lived group in that Blue Zone research were plant-based Seventh-day Adventists living in Loma Linda. So let's touch on this fragile earth that we all inhabit. Because this brings up the question, how green is your diet? We know that animal-based agriculture is one of the major contributors to the massive increases in greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane, that are responsible for causing and accelerating global warming and climate change. After energy production, raising animals for consumption is the #1 cause of global warming, and is responsible for 18% of greenhouse gas emissions. That is more than all of the greenhouse gases produced by all of the cars, trucks, trains, and planes combined. And the reason I call that a really inconvenient truth was because when Al Gore initially did his film, An Inconvenient Truth, he sidestepped the issue of animal agriculture as a major contributor. He has since tried to rectify this oversight and has apparently become plant-based himself. At over 7.6 billion individuals, humans display the classic population dynamics of a typical social herbivore species. And in fact, all large-bodied social mammals are herbivores, because only plants can produce enough energy in enough sustainable amounts to support these types of population. population. Switching to a vegetarian or vegan diet will reduce your carbon footprint by more than 1.5 tons of carbon dioxide a year. That is more than if you change to a hybrid car like a Prius. And I often say that if somebody drives a Prius and still eats meat, they need more fiber in their diet, if you get my drift. Cattle can also emit huge amounts of methane, and methane has a warming effect 23 times greater than carbon dioxide. So all of this methane warms the earth and contributes to climate change even more potently than does carbon dioxide. And nitrous oxide, when it gets into the atmosphere, has a warming effect 296 times greater than that of carbon dioxide. And just to look at the wastefulness of what we're doing with the food that we grow, 70% of the corn, and that's actually corn and soybeans that are grown in the United States every year, is used to feed to animals as opposed to feeding humans. And raising animals for food requires 17 times more land, 14 times more water, and 10 times more energy. It's not green at all. So having this knowledge, the knowledge that what we're doing is the right thing to do, it is better for us as humans, it is better for the earth itself, it is better for the animals. That knowledge should make us confident, but not arrogant, assertive, but not self-righteous. And I say this because, you know, we want to be out front with what we know and what we believe, but we should try not to be obnoxious about it, and to realize that, as I said before, most of us arrived at this truth in a gradual, stepwise fashion, and that we have to learn to be patient with other people and give them the room and the space they need to come to consciousness, so to speak. We should be willing to confront people without being crass, and be vocal about what we know and believe, while never becoming strident or insulting. And now I want to take a look back into the past and also a vision of the future by looking at the book of Daniel from the Bible. And one of the most important and impressive stories in the Bible is told in Daniel chapter 1. Daniel and 3 of his Hebrew companions were young men who were carried into the court of Babylon to serve as servants and officers for the king. And as such, they were entitled to what the Babylonians considered to be the best food they had to offer. However, when they brought that food to Daniel and his companions, they refused to eat it. They said, this stuff is unhealthy. We will not defile our bodies and destroy our health by eating it. And they said, give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. And the chief eunuch, who was in charge of the king's household, said, I can't let you do that, because if I do, you guys are going to end, where are you going to get your protein? You're going to end up being skinny and weak and sickly. And then when the king sees you, your health failing, he's going to end up chopping off my head because I let you guys eat this inadequate diet. So Daniel's response was, tell you what, let's do a test. Let us eat these vegetables and water for 10 days. And then at the end of the 10 days, compare us to all the other young courtiers who are eating the traditional food and see who's healthier. Just, put it to the test. And we're told that at the end of 10 days, Daniel and his companions were not only physically healthier, but they were more agile in mind and spirit than the people who were eating what the king provided, and they were allowed to remain on their plant-based diet. Well, then in Daniel chapter 2, we are told about Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And what's interesting about this is that Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon, had a dream that really disturbed him when he woke up. The interesting thing was that he could not remember what he had dreamed. He just knew that it was very important, it was very compelling, but he couldn't remember what he had dreamed. And so he called in all of his soothsayers, his astrologers, his magicians, and he said, "Tell me what I dreamed, number one, and then tell me what that dream meant." Well, of course, they looked at him and said, the equivalent of "Are you crazy?" in a politically correct way. And like, how can we tell you what you had dreamed, or how can we interpret a dream unless you tell it to us? And at that point, Nebuchadnezzar became just irrationally infuriated. And he said, "I'm going to kill all of you. What good are you guys if you can't tell me what I need to know? I'm going to have you all killed because you're worthless." And one of his other courtiers came to him and said, "King, and before you do that, let us call in Daniel, who's a Hebrew in whom is the spirit of the living God. He may be able to tell you what your dream was and what it meant." So they summoned Daniel. The king laid out to him the same thing he had said to the other, to his other magicians and astrologers. And he told Daniel, "If you can't tell me what my dream is by tomorrow, I'm gonna kill all of you." So Daniel went home. He prayed to God about it. And that night when he went to sleep, he had exactly the same dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And the dream was of this giant figure that I think was about 118 feet tall. And the head of the statue was made out of the finest gold. The chest and arms were of pure silver. The thighs and pelvis were of brass. And then the legs were made out of solid iron. And they ended in feet that were partly clay and partly iron. And Daniel came back and he related to Nebuchadnezzar what he had dreamed, and he gave him the interpretation of it. And the interpretation was as follows: that Babylon was the head of gold, and it would rule over the then known world for a period of time, but it would ultimately be replaced by the kingdom of the Medes and Persians, which would then rule for almost 200 years, or maybe a little over, and they would be eventually replaced by the Greeks under the initial leadership of Alexander the Great. And finally, all of those kingdoms would be superseded by the strongest and longest lasting of all of the ancient empires, and that was the Empire of Rome. And that's why Rome is depicted as iron, because it was just such a strong nation. But after the iron, the feet were made out of partially clay, partially iron. And so what Daniel explained to Nebuchadnezzar was that there would be these single kingdoms until the Roman kingdom, and after that, the world would splinter into all these individual nations, principalities, city-states, and would never again come under the political control of a single entity. But even more important, at the end of the dream, there came a rock from heaven that struck the statue in its feet and demolished it. And the rock itself then grew into a great mountain that covered the whole earth. And what Daniel explained to Nebuchadnezzar was that that rock was God's son, who would come and eventually do away with all of these defective, evil, sinful earthly kingdoms and set up his own kingdom that would rule throughout the earth forever. And that is really the story the Bible is telling us when you read it and take the overview, that God created a perfect world. Human beings messed that world up. He created a plan by giving his son as the sacrifice for human wrongdoing, where he could remove sin from humans, remove sin from the earth, and restore it back to that perfect condition in which he created it. And that's what's important about that, is that in Genesis, before sin entered the world, all animals, including humans, were completely vegan. There was no killing, no death, no decay. The phenomenon of predators and all of that came in after sin entered the world, and it became necessary to have a way to weed it out. So the ultimate point is that we can take hope in the fact that eventually all the misery and suffering that we see in this world will be done away with. And when looking at the impact of the vegan lifestyle, this is another quote from Dr. King. He says, "I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant." So let me leave you with some words to ponder. When we know what's right, we must take a stand for justice. And Dr. King said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." And he said, "When our days become dreary with low hovering clouds of despair, and when our nights become darker than 1,000 midnights, let us remember that there is a creative force in this universe working to pull down the gigantic mountains of evil, a power that is able to make a way out of no way and transform dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows." And this is a very beautiful statement. He says, "Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because it is the right thing to do." And in closing, I want to just bring our minds back to the fact that we live in a universe that is governed and ordered by the giving and interdependence. The reason that the planets in our solar system stay within their particular orbits is because of the influence of all of the other planets and the sun on each individual planet. And if you remove one, the rest will fly out into space. So we all depend on each other. And that is a principle that echoes throughout the universe, that planets and suns and solar systems are organized to be dependent on one another. Earth's ecology is a complex web of mutual dependence between all species, from bacteria to the blue whale. Everything has a place in life and a purpose. Oops, I'm sorry about that. The reason that we are given things in life is not so that we can hoard it or keep it to ourselves. It's so that we can give and bless others. Blessings should flow not just to us, but also through us to others. And that includes the truth that we know about the right way to live our lives. And this is something that has always rankled me when people will say things like, well, if there's a God, how come there's starving people? Well, it may be because instead of buying a house that cost $450,000, you went out and bought one that cost $2 million. It may be because instead of using your money to bless other people, you went out and spent it on a Bentley or a $300,000 car. The reason there are people suffering in this world is because we have dropped the ball and have not used the blessings that we receive to help others. This cartoon says, when God blesses you financially, don't raise your standard of living, raise your standard of giving. The light we receive should not be hoarded or hidden, nor treated as arcane truths only to be appreciated by a select few. It is to be shared. As Jesus said, we should never take our light and hide it under a bushel. We should set it on high where it can be seen by all people and help enlighten and educate the world. And finally, remember, trailblazers may sometime receive cuts and bruises from obstacles as they create new trails. So don't be discouraged by pushback or anger or insults you receive. That's part of what it means to be a leader and to be a trailblazer. Don't be discouraged, don't be daunted. Continue leading and others will surely follow. So after you leave this lecture, I want you to go forth, hopefully energized and renewed in spirit and committed to the job that we have to do in terms of helping to enlighten the world about not only justice for animals, but also justice for other human beings. And again, you're going to experience pushback. You're going to even get anger and insults from certain people. But remember that when you're sitting in a dark room and somebody suddenly turns on the light, that light initially hurts your eyes. And sometimes we even close our eyes for a time until we can get used to the light. So knowing this, we should not be dismayed if those around us don't immediately receive what we have to share with gladness. It will take time. Don't be discouraged by the flinty looks, the snarky comments, or even the outright hostility. We must learn to be patient and kind and quietly persistent. So I say to you, let Rosa Parks be your hero and your example. Take your metaphorical seat on the bus of truth and knowledge. Have the courage of your convictions. Remember, every single one of us has been appointed to be that ambassador of truth to the world. When you return home or as you go about your daily life, remember, although you may be by yourself, you're not alone. We're right there with you, standing behind you, beside you, and supporting you. And God is also with you. So represent what you have come to believe. And it is by embracing that role that we become stones of hope for this troubled world. And the last point I want to make is that this picture is a mosaic made up of thousands of pictures of individual people. And I like this for a number of reasons, because I believe that life itself is like a mosaic, and that each one of us has our own individual little tile that we're responsible for. And so, you know, we shouldn't look at the totality of the task and allow ourselves to be discouraged by it, because our job is not to do the totality of the task. Our job is to do our part, to make sure that our tile is polished, shining, and painted beautifully. And if we each put our mind to that and make sure our tiles are beautified and polished the way they should be, pretty soon we will have a glorious picture to share with the world. So we can all be stones of hope, helping to build a better world. And I just want to close with a prophecy from the Bible. This is from the book of Isaiah, the 11th chapter. It says, "The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the young goat, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord." That is Isaiah chapter 11, verses 6 through 9. And that is speaking of the time when sin will once more be removed from the earth and the universe, and everything and every animal will once again be vegan. And so we're at the end, and I will take questions now.
Milton, thank you so much. Thank you for welcoming us into your home and being so generous with your time. And why don't you unshare your screen?
Okay. Stop share.
There we go.
Okay.
Perfect. There we go. And we got lots and lots of questions.
Okay. You know what? Let's get through as many. We'll go to 8:50.
Okay, all right, thank you so much, really appreciate it. And I'm gonna have to jump around here a little bit, but let's see, we're at the Q&A. There it is. So this is a question from someone who says, as a white vegan environmentalist who wants to be able to engage in this conversation in both enviro and racial justice spaces, parentheses, my work involves a lot of direct work with this point of intersectionality, close parentheses, while still remaining extremely cognizant of my place as an ally / accomplice, not a BIPOC person myself. How can I best approach this?
Well, number one, just I would say that the fact that this person is already concerned and aware about this issue and aware of it is a huge step. You want to familiarize yourself with vegan groups that are run by people of color that are doing work in underserved areas. And, you know, I would say get in and listen to the people there, learn from them, and, you know, let them lead you in terms of how best you can help them achieve their goals and pursue their goals. And and whoever sent that question is clearly already aware that the worst thing to do is to go in and say, oh, you people need to do this, or the best way to do it is this. That we have to understand that you know, these groups have their own perspectives and agendas, and we have to be open enough to accept those different ways and different styles of doing things, and realize that just because it's not the way we would do it does not mean it's wrong. And in addition to that, I would say there's a whole slew of books that can really help open one's mind about this issue of racial justice. White Fragility is one. There are a huge number, which of course I'm drawing a blank on right now because there's just so many. But I will make a list and get that to you, Ted, so you can share with everyone.
Great. Thank you for that. Somebody really likes the new word that you coined. I'm assuming that word is pedophagia.
Pedophagia, yes.
Can you? Pedophagia. I spelled it out. I spelled it into this chat. P-E-D-O-P-H-A-G-Y.
No, it's A-G-I.
Pedophagia.
Yes.
Okay, pedophagia. Okay.
Pedophagia. I mean, that's what we do. We're dining on children. It's disgusting.
Right. Okay. So let's see. I've seen amazing vegan communities and African American communities in Baltimore and Washington, D.C. How have these communities been able to organize more effectively than some other communities? I've heard some people say that the vegan movement was white and privileged, but the vegan festivals and restaurants in these cities seem far beyond a lot of other communities.
Yeah, and so the movie that you mentioned that I'm part of, Ted, at the beginning of the event, The Invisible Vegan, the reason the producer, director, writer of that movie decided to do the movie was because she wanted to let people know that there is a very, very strong and established African-American vegan tradition. And that, you know, depending on where people might be, they may not be aware of those groups or of that tradition, and they may not, and therefore, if they don't know about it, they, you know, what we don't know about doesn't exist, right? But so the first thing is to understand that there is a very strong history of plant-based eating and lifestyle within the Black community, both here in the United States and elsewhere in the world, and that what we have to do is to seek out information, seek out those groups, learn about them, learn what those traditions are. And I would strongly urge everyone to watch The Invisible Vegan. That will go a long ways towards helping people understand just the depth, breadth, and beauty of the Black vegan movement. But it's definitely there. And it's also there because of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And in the interest of transparency, I should tell everybody listening that I am Seventh-day Adventist. I didn't grow up, my family wasn't Seventh-day Adventist. I actually joined the church as a teenager. But one of the things that, there were several things that attracted me to the denomination. One was their emphasis on plant-based diets, because that's exactly what God said. He designed a seed. But the other thing that was really important to me as a Black man was that the Seventh-day Adventist Church as a denomination came into being in the mid-1800s. And from its very inception, it was abolitionist, unapologetically abolitionist. And unlike other denominations, such as, they're Methodists, right? Then there's African Methodists. The reason the African Methodists exist was because the regular Methodists didn't want Black people worshiping with them. So they say, y'all go over there and do your own church. Seventh-day Adventists didn't do that. From the very beginning, they're like, we're all God's people. We will worship together. But although they did establish a special work in the South to work with freed African Americans and so forth. And I say all that to say that there is a group of Black Seventh-day Adventists living in the Huntsville area, because there's a HBCU run by our church called Oakwood College. And it looks like there is likely a second blue zone in the United States. And that blue zone is comprised of the Black people living in and around the Huntsville area. And I'm currently trying to generate some interest into actually going in and doing the research work to document it, because for obvious reasons, it would just be so important to establish that.
Mm-hmm. So for people who doubt that plant-based or vegan diet is for weaklings, I just want to point out that Dr. Mills has been going strong here since 7 o'clock and is showing no sign of waning. And in fact, he's going to be doing another meeting after this. So here's an interesting question. What advice do you have? I am a Black single mom. I have an 8-year-old son who is curious about my new vegan journey. I don't know how to adequately respond to his inquiries about my new lifestyle, and I don't want to influence him, but rather set an example.
Okay, then I am the wrong person to ask that question, because I take the General Sherman approach to these topics. And let me explain what I mean by that. At 2 separate points in my life, I started taking care of teenage nephews because there were family issues, and so they had to come out and move in with me. And I distinctly remember that one of my nephews said, as he was coming out to live with me, he said, well, I'm not vegan, so I eat meat. And I looked at him and said, well, I don't buy poison and you don't have a job. So you have to eat what I provide. And, I got pushback, but I told him, look, my job as your parental figure is not to do what you like or to try and be your buddy. My job is to do what's best for you. Now, you may grow up and decide you want to do something different, but while you're in my house, I'm going to do what I know is the best thing for you. And that may seem harsh, but I told them that they could not bring meat into my house. They couldn't cook it in my house. But that if they wanted to use their money to go buy something, I couldn't stop them because they were old enough to make that decision. I am happy to tell you that they each got a pretty decent allowance from me. They never once went out and spent their money on chicken or hamburgers, because the food that I provided was delicious and satisfying, and they were happy with it. They spent their money on sneakers, Jordans, and CDs, and all this other, the typical stuff teenagers do. So I say that to say that, kids look to us to show them the way to go. And we have to be, this gets back to that period of awkwardness and uncomfortableness. Yeah, they may initially push back, but if the food is good, if it is delicious, and you explain to them why it's important to do this, they will adjust. And because remember, there is no biological drive to eat dead, rotting corpses. That is a habit we pick up. That's a habit we teach our kids. and we can teach them better ways and different ways. And kids are very resilient. They will adapt and they'll be cool with it. And Ted, you can probably comment on that yourself, because you and Carol, when you became plant-based, you brought your kids along. I think Nate was the only one that came close to being Athena, because I think he was vegan from Jump Street.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing up my kids. I always appreciate that. So we've been vegan for 30 years, since 1991. And Nathaniel was not born yet, so he's been vegan since before birth. The girls were basically toddlers when we made the switch. And in answer to the mom who has this question, yeah, you're the boss, but he is 8 years old, so he has reached some level of intelligence and questioning. And so I would suggest some movies like Game Changers, The Invisible Vegan. Look for some role models. That's I think really helpful. And before we get to the final questions here, because we are running out of time, I just wanted to mention that this program was brought to you by the Rochester Area Vegan Society in Rochester, New York, as well as Rochester Lifestyle Medicine. RochesterLifestyleMedicine.org is in the business of creating more vegans, because we are creating, we have programs that teach people how to eat plant-based food. And we again refer to vegan as the V word, because we don't want to scare them off. But what I tell people is, look, animals do not care why you do not eat them. They're perfectly happy that they don't. If you're not eating them because you want to be healthy, they don't really care. They just are happy that you're not eating them. So there's a really interesting question here. One of the first we got is, are there any parallels between the civil rights movement and the Indian freedom movement led by Gandhi, and specific parallels which we can use to share with Indian Americans who are devout vegetarians and continue to consume dairy, which we know is an extremely cruel industry? Thank you. And this comes from somebody with, sounds like an Indian name. So
of course, there are direct comparisons, because Martin Luther King was very clear that he adapted his policy of nonviolence and nonviolent interaction with the authority figures from the methods that Gandhi used in India to gain independence from Britain. So no, there absolutely are direct parallels and important ones. And yes, I fully understand your concern about the continued use of dairy, which is not only a cruel industry. I tell, if anybody out there needed a blood transfusion and came to me as a physician, I said, okay, I'm going to give you some cow's blood. Not one of you, if you have any sense, would let me do that, because you know that cow's blood is not meant for human beings. Well, the same thing is true of cow's milk. And again, we don't have time to go into this now, but milk is a biologically active fluid that does a lot of things to our physiology. And when you drink milk that comes from another species, you screw up your health. So yes, I mean, we have to find ways of engaging that topic with not only people South Asian descent, but also there's still quite a number of people in the United States who are quote unquote vegetarian as opposed to vegan. And we just have to help people understand the cruelty involved, but also the health consequences of consuming dairy, and realize that there are excellent alternatives that replace all of those products so that we don't need it.
Excellent. All right, so we're almost out of time. I'm going to give, this is the lightning round with one question.
Okay.
And then we're going to have to say goodnight. The question is, what about people who say, but God gave humans dominion over animals?
Oh my God. Okay. I'm having a heart attack, but I'm gonna work through it. The Bible also says that, so it all turns on what you think dominion means. The Bible says that when Jesus rose from the tomb and his sacrifice was accepted by his Father, that God gave him dominion over all of humanity and all the earth. But Jesus didn't start eating us, did he? No, because that word dominion that is used in the Bible connotes nurturing, support, caretaking. It's not dominance and abuse. It's like the dominion parents have over their family. They get to make the decisions because they have the perspective and the wisdom to make, hopefully, to make the appropriate decisions. So it is caretaking, it is nurturing, it is supporting, it is not abusiveness. The Bible could not be clearer. When God created Adam and Eve, he told them, Genesis 1:29, to be plant-based. And even after they sinned, he changed their diet in Genesis 3:18. But he didn't say go out and start killing animals. He said, now you got to eat the plants of the field, which formerly had been reserved for the animals. So there is no question that we were created to be plant-based, that is God's desire for us, that eventually, if you plan on going to heaven, you better get rid of that fried chicken right now, because there ain't gonna be no KFC. And so it's that there's just no excuse for thinking that animals were put here to be used and abused. When God said it is not good that the man should be alone, most people think he created Eve. That's not what chapter 2 of Genesis says. It says he formed the beasts out of the dust of the earth and brought them to Adam to give them names. So the Bible is teaching us that animals were our first companions. They were put here as our companions, not as beings to be used and abused. So
thank you. Somehow I thought you'd have an answer for that. So thank you, everybody.
I'm so sorry we don't have time for more questions, but
well, there's 32 questions or 33 questions, and there was in the Q&A, and there was a bunch of stuff going on in the chat, and we could go on all night. But honestly, we are so appreciative of your generosity with your time and letting us into your house, and you even cleaned up, and we appreciate that.
Well, this was a delight to do, Ted, and thank you again for asking me to do it. It was a labor of love, and I think this talk in this earlier version, so it is significantly expanded, because it was just really important to me, and I wanted to try and help people see those important parallels, and hopefully people were blessed by it.
Great, thank you. And this has been recorded, and we'll send a link to everybody in a few days.
Okay,
so,
yes, because I would love to. Yeah. I'm looking forward to putting this up on my website.
Perfect. Okay, thanks a lot, Milton. Good night, everybody.
You're very welcome. All right, good night, everybody. Take care. God bless.
Thank you, and thanks to our engineer, Bob Frankie.